In our previous conversation, we talked about distractedness, how it impacts our lives each and every day. Now we want to talk about mindfulness and how we don't have to live a distracted life, but we can live a mindful life. And we'll talk about the relationship between mindfulness and meditation. So, Mark, a little bit about what is mindfulness and what is meditation. This is a term that's often confused. How do you put these two things together?
Well, they are together, but they are distinguishable. And I think it's very important that our audience keep in mind this distinction. You're right, because we often confuse these terms, and sometimes they're used interchangeably, and that's not a real problem except when we're trying to teach exactly what meditation and mindfulness are. So it's important that we make this kind of distinction. We have defined mindfulness as simply relaxed attention, the ability to stay attentive and relaxed at the same time, because oftentimes when we're attentive, we're not relaxed. Oftentimes when we're relaxed, we're not attentive. So if we think of mindfulness as simply that ability to stay aware and yet not to be anxious, not to be judgmental, not to be stressed, then we're in that state of mindfulness. We can also more formally define mindfulness as simply moment by moment awareness. That as things are happening in our lives, and by that I mean as things happen externally, as things happen within our minds, right, we are keenly aware of what's going on as it's going on.
So that's how you're defining mindfulness.
That's mindfulness.
Exactly.
And I like to think of mindfulness as a quality of our being.
Absolutely. And that's how I think about mindfulness as well. And we'll talk about meditation in a second. The other thing that I really want to emphasize about the conversation about mindfulness is people think it's a state of mind. And rather, it's more a state of being. And that's the concept that we really need to ingrain with our students and viewers, is that we can be often in a mindful way of life. So tell us maybe a little bit about how you think about that.
Well, I think that's a very important distinction, because what mindfulness is something that we want to be all the time. And this is kind of a nice segue into how we think about meditation. Meditation is a practice for the enhancement of mindfulness. It's not something that we do all the time. So our goal is to practice meditation as an exercise on a daily basis, and we might devote 5 minutes a day to doing that. But we want to be mindful all the time. So just as you wouldn't expect to go to the gym and live your life in a gym just to be strong, you go there at specific times of the day to practice, so that for the rest of your life you can experience the benefits of, let's say, lifting weights or working out on a treadmill. The same thing applies to meditation.
And that analogy works extremely well, right? Physical well-being, mental well-being, lifting weights, doing meditation, and so forth. So that analogy goes a long way in thinking about the mental well-being, physical well-being, meditation, and exercise. And what I've noticed is our society has focused mostly on physical well-being. We really don't talk about mental well-being. We really don't talk about ways that we can become mentally strong, right?
Yeah.
And I think this entire movement that our society is going through to become more mindful, that's what it will lead to. Just as over the past 50 to 100 years, we have become more physically fit in ways that doing formal exercise.
Well, that really stimulates my mind, and I guess that's a good thing. And my response to it is sort of twofold. One is, I think one of the reasons we focused on the body and physical culture and developing our exercise and our physical natures is that we're a materialistic culture. I mean, the traditional stereotype is that the West is very materialistic and the East is very spiritual. I think that's an oversimplification, but it is true that in the West we are quite materialistic. We're focused upon consumerism, on cars, on things of a physical nature. So it's not unusual that our culture tends to focus upon the body.
The body.
Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is, in response to what you're saying about maybe this movement now towards mindfulness, is that I would in some ways sort of place the responsibility on our academic institutions as well. We have a great tradition of academics in the West, but our focus has been on the content of knowledge, on gaining facts, on understanding how things operate. But
Sure.
one thing that we don't do well is to focus introspectively on how our minds work.
And I really believe that's where the revolution is going to be. We have explored the smallest and the tiniest of bacteria to molecules to atoms. We have explored the universe and galaxies. We haven't explored the inner self.
Yeah.
We haven't explored our mind.
Yeah.
Yes, we have looked at the brain, but looking at the mind is something that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And maybe not just as an individual researcher has to do this, but we as a collective society have to really think that what happens when we get a group of people together and we're having a mindful exercise or a mindful conversation. And you know that's happened to you and me on various occasions. You're sitting in a room with a group of people and all of a sudden there is this feeling that we're all connected. We may not even have spoken a word. And that's what we need to cultivate. It only rarely happens, maybe once in a month or maybe once in a year or never for many people. But if we cultivate that culture in our kids, in ourselves, in our colleagues, we would be living in a different world.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we'll discover is that it also enhances the other goals that we have of physical well-being and academic acuity. So just as part of what we want to do and have been trying to do as a culture is to become more physically fit and more healthy, and also to become sharper in our intellectual capacities, the practice of mindfulness will actually enhance those goals.
So let's talk about a specific example. We can talk about abstracts a lot.
All right.
So give me an example of how we can be mindful right now.
Okay. So let me just ask you to engage in a little experiment with
Sure.
me for a second. So
Yeah.
close your eyes
Okay.
and try to attend to the sound of my voice. I don't want you to listen so much to the content of what I'm saying, but I want you to attend to the timbre of my voice, to the tone of my voice, to the volume of my voice, and listen to that for just a moment. Okay, now that you've done that, I want you to sort of open your eyes, and I'm going to ask you some questions about that. So what did you observe?
So, I didn't notice this before, but the softness of the voice and the tone and the clarity by which you were expressing your ideas, I could visualize them much better.
Okay.
And all of those elements, I wouldn't have noticed.
Exactly right. You were being mindful. That is the state of being mindful, of attending to your experience, and your experience was that of listening to my voice in a very sharp, acute way.
Sure.
Okay. Now, were you making any judgments about my voice?
So at that time, I was not comparing your voice to anything else. I was just listening, and listening for understanding, for perceiving.
Okay. Very good. So no thoughts came into your mind like, man, this guy has a southern accent, or, people with southern accents really aren't as smart as other people are.
Yeah.
If you were doing something like that, that was losing your sense of mindfulness, okay? Because the element of dialogue, the element of judgment, of evaluation has entered in. But simply to be present to my voice and to note its various qualities and characteristics in a curious, open, non-judgmental way. That is what we mean by mindfulness.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation, and it really helps many of us better understand what is mindfulness and what is meditation. It also talks about mindfulness as an individual, but also the mindfulness collectively, what we think what mindfulness can do for our society and community. As we conclude this conversation, please join us for our next conversation, which will be about meditations. And meditations are of 3 categories, and we'll talk more about that. So thank you very much for joining us.